All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this first webinar that FinEquity is hosting in 2022 on February 22nd. It's a very interesting date as I just looked at it and realized lots of twos. Today, we're going to be talking about data analytics and making the case for the women's market. We are using the work done by VPBank in Vietnam. Some of you might have participated in a webinar we did with VPBank back in October last year, where we heard about how they invested in women SMEs, in how they saw an opportunity for investing in women SMEs in Vietnam. And in today's webinar, we kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and get a chance to look at how did they recognize the opportunity and quantify it, and what kind of data analytics were involved. So welcome, we're going to get started. We have a packed agenda for the next just under 90 minutes. Can we move to the next slide? Before I get into the agenda, I just wanted to introduce you to our speakers for today. We have Ken Liffiton, who is the managing director for Andafin, which is a consulting firm, and Ken has been working with VPBank amongst others to do some of the data analytics, and he will be leading the workshop today. And then we have Ms. Phương, who's the head of the card division at VPBank, and she was involved in led the process of doing the analysis and coming up with the strategy. So we'll get to hear straight from her on their experience. So I'll just walk you through the agenda and then hand it over to our wonderful speakers and hosts for the workshop. So we just went over the introductions. We'll start with the basics of strategic data analysis for the women's market. And then we'll get into the core, which is a case study of VPBank's women's market data analysis, which they did back in 2017. And how did they use this data to make strategic decisions? And then how their Women Entrepreneur Initiative is going now, what progress have they made? And then we'll close with some tips for financial institutions that are interested in, adopting a similar approach. What would it take? What needs to be in place? So we hope you'll find this useful. There's a chat function. You can post your questions. I will be monitoring it and sharing it with the speakers from time to time. So feel free to add your questions as we go along. With that, we do have a quick poll. So can we go to the first poll? Can you launch that, Daniel? All right, so you see a poll on your screen. Does your financial institution, or if you work with financial institutions, have a women's market strategy? Let's get some answers here. I see them coming in. So I'm going to give it a few more seconds. All right. So far, it seems like a fairly even split between the yes and no's. Okay, I think we can close the poll and share the result, Daniel. All right, as you'll see, so majority of the respondents said we're developing them now, don't have one. And a number of them, but they're considering it. We do have somebody who said they haven't considered it. And then we do have, a good number of the people today who are already doing something. So it would be great to hear about your own experiences or the questions you have also. All right, we have another quick poll. So can we launch the second poll, Daniel? All right. Does your financial institution or most of the financial institutions you work with use data analysis for strategic decision making? So here we're just asking you to pick one. Let's see, I see the responses coming in. Let's get a few more before we close it. Okay. Okay, I think we can close it, Daniel. All right, so it looks like for the majority of our respondents today, yes, but on an ad hoc basis, and then there's those who devote significant resources. So now that we're warmed up and gotten into the swing of things, I'm going to hand it off to Ken.
Yes, actually, Ms. Phương is speaking first about VPBank,
Okay.
and now tell folks about Andafin. So Ms. Phương, you have the floor.
Thank you, Nisha. Ken. Hi, everyone. As introduced by Nisha, I'm from VPBank. Currently, I'm heading the commercial card and payment solution at VPBank SME division. VPBank in Vietnam is ranking at the top 5 private banks. In Vietnam, we have around 40 private banks together with the 4 big state-owned banks. So VPBank is the top 5 of the private banks. And especially at VPBank, you know that we have the dedicated SME division to serve SME. Just a few banks in Vietnam have that kind of division, a business division, besides the corporate banking division, besides the retail banking division. So, so we have, with that division, we currently have the portfolio of around 100,000 SME customer. We have around 64 SME center to serve this customer, to serve this portfolio, and besides the 243 branches around the country. Yeah, you know that talking about SME, we know that it's they fight hard to approach the funding from the bank if they don't have the collateral, and most of the SME they don't have the collateral to provide the bank. So understanding the challenge of the SME in VPBank, we have developed our cash management product offering. So with that product offering, we aim to facilitate the payments and collection of the micro and the SME. So that's the reason why we partner with Mastercard to build the car business, the commercial car business. And you know that unlike the traditional lending product, credit card can give the bank a lot of data, a lot of information. The bank will know when and how and where the customer manage their payables with the credit card. Yeah, so with that, we think that when we identify credit card, commercial credit cards as a product offering, we focus on the data management. It's a very critical part. So we decided to conduct overall SME credit card product analysis. That's why we contact Andafin. When we contact Andafin and for SME credit card product, together with the proposal to have the deep dive into our portfolio, we also give a chance to our BI department, because they need to improve the way they do the analysis. So based on the project output, the initiative Women Market Strategy launched was the focus on the car product. So with that, I would like to hand over to Ken to go into detail about the analysis and the output, some more about the output of the project.
Great, thanks. So yeah, first, of course, thanks to VPBank for supporting this webinar. It's unusual to have a bank willing to share its real data for a case study such as this. Of course, it helps that the data is from 2017, so that it doesn't have quite as much strategic importance, but it's still special that we're able to do that. So thanks very much to Ms. Phương and VPBank, as well as FinEquity for setting this up. So a little bit about Andafin. So we do consulting and data analytics for financial institutions in MSME finance and mobile money, all of them in emerging markets, mostly in Asia and Africa. We do that by analyzing the transaction data from those financial products. So we're analyzing millions of transactions in a given project using our own proprietary cloud-based data analytics platform. So you'll see more about what we do as we go through this seminar. So to review some of the foundations, some of the fundamentals of what we need to address the women's market and data analysis more generally, I've prepared just a few slides going over the foundations. So we assume that a financial institution pursuing a project like this has a few things in place. And it sounds, from the poll, it sounds like some of the financial institutions here are partway down that path and others are further down the path, but kind of this is the basic checklist. So of course, data on your product, which actually can be harder to get than you think, as we'll see in the case study, including all the transactions, all of the customer demographics about that product. If you're dealing with SMEs, a challenge is figuring out the gender of that SME. So the owner gender, we in this case use the IFC definition, which is either women has majority ownership of the business, or women have minority ownership, but also have CEO or board representation. Then, of course, you need to be able to pull data from all of the systems involved in delivering your product. And as a bonus, if you can get data on the staff involved in delivering the product, sometimes there are some interesting learnings to be had in terms of how staff gender interacts with product delivery. Then in terms of the capabilities the bank needs, of course, analytics, whether that's BI department or an external resource. Next is a data warehouse, which basically stores the data from all of these systems in a structured format that allows for easy analysis. And of course, sufficient access to that data for the people who need to do the analysis. At bigger institutions, that can be a challenge. And then quite importantly, institutional data mindset and buy-in. So that was a key element at VPBank, is that we had support from the top of the SME division for doing data-based decision-making. And there it's important to both have a process for getting data as you run your products and also use that data to make decisions. Now, to frame where we're looking at in this case study, we see a few steps for data analysis for the women's market. So first, of course, is making the case for change, which is what we're looking at here. Second is building and improving products for women. And third is monitoring and improvement of those products. So in the time since our analysis, of course, VPBank has progressed through these stages, and we'll learn a bit about the end about how they've done that. But for our purposes, we're going to be focusing on quantifying the opportunity in the women's market and presenting those findings to the board or to the management of the bank. Then beyond that, in terms of building products, the bank also has the opportunity to do further customer segmentation, to build the customer value proposition for those products, figure out where their current products are going wrong, where are the gaps, where are the misspecifications, and then finally to combine, in the rollout of these products, combine the internal data with external data such as customer surveys to understand the customer behaviors better. Now, when we look into quantifying the opportunity, there are a couple of distinct approaches, and a bank may use one or both of these approaches to quantifying that market opportunity. So, of course, in traditional market research, the bank is relying on external data from, probably a market research firm, surveys and so forth. Doesn't learn as much from current customers' behavior, but the advantage is they do learn things about customers who are not currently served by the bank. Our approach in this project with internal data analysis, here we're actually seeing the customer's actual behavior rather than how they answer a question about their behavior. And so we can see the actual performance of different kinds of customers. And also this kind of analysis in some cases can be used to find what we call hidden customers elsewhere in the bank. So it's very common, for example, for customers who have small businesses who are using retail division accounts to try to meet the needs of those businesses. But actually the SME division of the bank has a better product range for what those customers could be using. And then finally, we can use all of this data to understand the current customers. Very importantly, we can understand customer lifetime value by segment, and that's a big focus of the VPBank project, is explaining what the value of different segments is, particularly women-owned businesses. And then finally, this internal behavioral data from the transactions can then be used for focus group research, actually asking the customers, okay, why do you use the product the way you do? What is that that you'd like to get out of your usage of the bank's products? So next we have a poll. Nisha?
Oh, yeah, we're going to ask everyone to annotate this in Zoom as opposed to put a poll. So you have 4 figures, as you'll see on your screen. And if you look at more under your, I should be able to do this, but we have a few people who are familiar with Zoom. So if you want to talk, circle or stamp by looking at, when you click on view options at the top, you see annotate. If you click on annotate, you just, pick a stamp and select one of the figures. How do you feel when you think about your financial institution's data? Do any of these images, we purposely did not put words here, so whichever makes you, resonates the most with you. And I see already a few stars on the crossroads. Yeah, so let's see. It's also a way for us to check whether you're listening or not. Light bulb. Yes. Okay, let's give it 10 more seconds and see if we get a few more responses. There. Okay. So it seems like we have a fairly even split between lots of questions and being at crossroads in which direction to go. A few, light bulb or ideas, and then there's definitely a few people who are like, I don't know what to do with this, or this is too much information. Does that sound about right, Ken?
Yeah, that sounds about right, and it's certainly a progression. And VPBank certainly made that progression as well with our project in the next few years after that. So yeah, good to see folks moving on the path.
Okay, so we can move on.
Let's see, clear the drawings. Okay.
All right, one more exercise. Let's do this again now that you actually know and are familiar with how to use the annotate option. So what do you want to learn more about from your gender disaggregated data, whether you already have it or are in the process of developing your strategy? So either circle or stamp one of these: customer behavior, staff performance, geographic trends, product usage pattern, customer lifetime value, customer retention, gender gaps, cross-selling opportunities. And I see now there's a lot more activity going on, which is great. Seems like everything. Everybody wants to know everything. Which sort of relates to the previous one. Then you have, some choices to make. Okay, so yeah, I see it's very hard to tell for me at this point which has the highest votes, but I would say product usage pattern, gender gaps seem like much higher, and then cross-selling opportunities and customer retention and customer behavior. That would be the order I would put that in.
Yeah, great. And of course, the good news is you can learn all of these things if you've collected the data, which can be a years-long process. So get started now. In the VPBank project, we did touch on most of these things except staff performance and cross-selling opportunities. One, because it was a one product project, and two, because we didn't have the relevant staff data, but we were able to learn about most of these things. So let's hear that. Yeah, so getting a bit deeper into what we can learn. One is that we can use our internal data to uncover hidden opportunities in the business, as I touched on earlier. Two, to reduce bias in decision making. Very often when we do a project like this, we have some folks in the bank who are quite receptive to it. And then you occasionally have one or two people who are like, well, I've been doing this for 10, 20 years and I know everything there is to know about customers. And we've got annotations back. Okay, well that's, and so, there's a certain bias inherent in that perspective. The experience is useful, but it needs to be combined with what does the data actually say about how our customers are behaving now, not necessarily in the past 20 years, right? Next, ensure that we're serving customer segments well. Sometimes we find that a certain segment is not being served as well as it could be, and we can see that in maybe usage or high NPLs or whatever. Somehow the product isn't specified correctly for that group. And also to understand staff performance and incentives. That can be really powerful to understand which staff are really excelling with this product and why. And that also we've seen in some cases can overturn some biases that are held within the financial institution. Like for example, in one financial institution where not VPBank, but in a different country, where we were able to show them, hey, your women staff are really excelling, and you really should start considering them as potential branch managers, which you've never done before. And so, well, that's something we'll have a look at. Then gender related findings could include repayment and retention by gender, and also related to staff gender, transaction behavior by gender, and that a lot we can do with that in mobile money. That can be very interesting. Gender gaps, both customers and staff. In Vietnam, outside of SME, we tend to have a negative gender gap, but then we have the usual gender gap in SME. geographic and regional behavior trends. So we sometimes see, difference in behavior across a country depending upon how the culture varies in that country. And then finally, staff performance, product uptake, and of course, customer lifetime value. So we'll turn to an overview of the project. Ms. Phương.
Yes, okay. So can you go ahead, please, Ken?
Oh, sure. Okay. Yeah, we're a little confused about that slide. Sorry about that. So the scope of the project was to analyze the SME credit card product, including not only the customer demographics and behavior, but also to learn about supply chain finance usage, because actually a lot of the customers use this credit card product to manage cash flows in the supply chain, and very often they're paying it off during the grace period, so they get the benefit of financing at no cost. Also, it's to understand spend patterns. Then also the goal was to do analysis from the transaction level to get a full picture of the customer. So basically we had to get both the transactions the customer made on the account and the transactions that the bank made on the account, the financial transactions, revenue collection and so forth. Next was to provide training to the business intelligence department. So they worked alongside us on this project, and so that they had a deliverable they could show with a new kind of analysis, strategic analysis that they hadn't really done before. Actually, the women's market was just one part of the project. So we're looking at a portion of the project for this workshop, but it turned out to be, I think, one of the most interesting parts of the project in terms of findings that we were not actually at the top priority initially, but when we came out at the end, said, wow, this is really something the bank should look at. And quite importantly, this project was a success because we had management buy-in. We had the support of the business, both the SME business unit head, who was also a deputy CEO of the bank, as well as the head of the BI department. So that was critical for making this project a success. Ms. Phương, do you have anything to add about the overview of the project?
Yeah, I think that thanks to this project, that we was empowered by the data, by the output of the project, and after that, as Ken just mentioned, that we have a chance to do the product evaluation and identify a potential assessment to make as a special product for the bank. So talking about when we look at the report of this project, we're working with Andafin. That before that we have a lot of assumption, and we didn't notice that women enterprise or women SME they plays a critical role in our portfolio. But with this project output, you can look at the slide and see that the woman SME in our data have an average of 8 years in business. So there has been for quite a long time. And around the yearly revenue is 2 million. So they're not too small, but it is not. If we didn't conduct the analysis with Andafin, we didn't look at the data. We just made assumption that most of the that the customer in our portfolio is managed by men, and we really surprised when we look at the industry that women have explored. You can see that the construction, logistics, manufacturing, mining, and service and trading, but in which you can see that trading is accounts for the big share in the woman SME portfolio. So just walk through you a bit about our woman SME portfolio in this project. Thanks again.
Great. Yeah, it was certainly enlightening to learn about the businesses. I believe mining was like mining metal and related services. So it wasn't necessarily running a mine, which is a very capital intensive business that couldn't be done at this size. But yeah, it's certainly a diversity of industries in the women-owned businesses. So to go over a few highlights of the analysis project. Here I'm just going to cover kind of the process, highlights of the process, and then later we're going to get into the actual content of the analysis. So in terms of the overall steps of the project, one, of course, is getting data. And the challenges that we ran into here hopefully will be of interest and use to other financial institutions as they think about how to go about these kinds of projects, right? So in this case, we had a well-established bank. They already had a data warehouse. They had a very clear, data governance framework in terms of who owns what data in the bank and so forth. But access to that data was very siloed at the time. So for example, if we wanted to get all of the transaction on a customer's account, we had to ask the folks operating the card product for the card transactions that the customer had made. And then we had to ask the finance department for the transactions that the bank had made in terms of interest and fees and so forth. So normally, the business unit would get a finance report with all of the financial data on the card, and then they'd have usage statistics, but there was no way to combine those things because the data was in two completely separate bodies, right? And so there was some movement through the bank to get permission from everybody to get all this get all of this data in one place. Also, the data was stored in an unprocessed state in terms of there wasn't much summarization or structuring of the data. Fortunately, it was all there, but typically in a data warehouse, you want the data a little bit more structured to get closer to what you would use for analysis. And then finally, some data wasn't collected yet. So particularly the credit card, it was a fairly new product. It was just a few years old. And the onboarding process wasn't yet using the bank's CRM probably because it didn't have quite the volume that a retail product would. So some processes were still manual, and so the bank moved to address that. Next, in terms of cleaning and transforming data so that we have good structured data to analyze, right? So it's a usual problem in a larger institution of you have data drawn from multiple systems. The structure is not great, so it takes a lot of time to process that. So actually, a data analysis project often is a lot more time getting and cleaning and transforming data than actually analyzing data. That's all the run up to the actual analysis, which time-wise might not take nearly as much time. So we had to build a new data structure to combine all this data to get a picture of the customer who used this product. We're able to present 6 top-level industries that the customers are in, but without this categorization exercise, 32 categories is just too much to get your head around, right? So we learned a lot through this process of getting ready to do the analysis along with the BI department, and then the BI department continued to enhance the bank's processes and systems to be more ready for these kinds of projects in the future. Next, in terms of analyzing data and visualizing the results, so getting to the stage of what you see in the dashboard, where at least we have a lot of visualization and we want to figure out what's important in this data. So first, we did what we call a baseline analysis to confirm the portfolio figures and the completeness of the data set with VPBank. So that's kind of a top-level report on the product to say, okay, based on all of the data, all the transactions you gave us, this is what we think the size of this product is in terms of customers and revenue and so forth. Does that match what your finance department and so forth says? If it does, we're ready to proceed with the rest of the project, or else we need to go back and fix the data, right? So yeah, next, analyzing the gender trends as well as overall customer engagement, and particularly supply chain finance, understanding how the customers were using this product for cash management. And we saw some rather interesting usages when we got really deep into the data. But at a top level, we have some interesting findings here as well. And this was all built with a feedback loop with the SME business unit for further follow-up on findings, working through different hypotheses and so forth as to what we're seeing in the data and why we think that might be, and what we should be looking at next. So later in this webinar, we'll get through a shortened version of a hypothesis testing exercise. And then finally getting to the decision-making process. So this project had both strategic and operational components to it. So on the one hand, yes, we want to understand how is the product working from an operational perspective, are our promotions working, and this kind of thing. But also, where should the product go next, right? And so the women's market was the big one that we identified, and then we also found more niche opportunities in supply chain finance, but those also can be very interesting when a bank is able to go up and down a supply chain with a card product. In order to get into the analysis, first, I think we need to understand a little bit more about credit cards, which are a little more complicated than what you see from the customer perspective. So Ms. Phương will tell us about that.
Yeah. So I think in the card payment industry, we have some critical stakeholder. You can see the issuer actually is the bank or any financial institution that they have the license, especially in Vietnam, have the license to issue card. Then the bank will do the evaluation and issue the card to the card holder. The card holder in this case is the business customer. It can be the business customer, it can be a consumer customer, but when we're talking about credit card, most people think of the consuming, it's a consuming product, but actually it can be a commercial product. So the card holder here can use the card to make the payment at the merchant. The merchant can be the supplier or the goods service providing that accept card. They have some device to accept card, just POS or payment gateway. In this case, if the payment gateway or the POS device, it must be provided by the acquirer. So we call acquirer is a card acceptance bank that provide the device and the network to the merchants. So this is the four stakeholder, but they need the card network to involve. So between the issuer and the acquirer, they need to join, they need to participate in a network that can help them to process the transaction. So on the process here, if we're talking about the authorization, it will happen just about less than 9 seconds. And after that, the card holder can make the payment and receive the merchants merchandise or the goods or services. And the merchant can get credit from acquirer within a day or a day plus one. So that's the overall process of credit card.
So next is the basically the costs and revenue that go into the credit card transaction. Ms. Phương?
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So talking about this, you know that about it can be the revenue from the issuer, but it can be the cost from the acquirer. So when we talk about the roles of the issuer in this project, we look at the interest and the fee, or we call it the interchange. The interchange income that the issuer bank will receive is very it can be different from based on the MCC. It means that the merchant category that the card holder going to spend on that merchant. So and besides the revenue, we have the cost per transaction. So we also have the cost of funding. That's the big cost, cut to the big one. We have to take care of the provision, and we need to pay for the customer incentive, customer acquisition cost. That's the whole cost. That's the whole cost, and we call it the P&L, the profits and loss that we need to look into careful, because before we conduct any product, during the product development process. So, but I don't think that I'm going to share into more detail about this revenue. It can make people feel very quite boring and complicated if we go into
I just need to understand it at a high level for this project. Yeah. So
yeah, at the high level, we have the
interchange
interest
is
and the fee.
the key concept, and I'll get into that later as well.
And the interchange is will vary based on the merchant category code that at the merchant.
All right, so that's the overview of credit cards. So I think we're okay on time. Nisha, what do we have in the way of questions?
We do have a few questions, so I'm going to take these in order. Early on, we had some questions. One was with respect to data analytics, to what degree are data governance and ESG goals considered as a part of this process? So I don't know if you want me to read a few questions and then take them.
Well, I guess that one's fairly quick. Data governance was, in this case, was more focused on how data is used or owned in the organization, who has access to it, that kind of thing. So it was more of an administrative thing. I don't believe it had an ESG component. That would be, I think, a separate issue.
Okay. And then there was another question with respect to customers. What specific challenges required the need to rethink the strategy, particularly regarding cultural nuances, regionally speaking? So yeah, what was the motivation? But also, I think that, the point you mentioned, Ms. Fung, about there were assumptions that were made about the women's market, and how the data sort of disproved some of that. Can you share a little bit about, what was, what was it that prompted you to rethink the strategy? What was the starting point?
That when we conducted this analysis project with Andafin, we still in the assumption that the major in the portfolio is not woman SME. So most of the product we will not mention about the gender. So it's most served for the men to do the business.
Yeah.
And when we look at the data, we realize that, okay, women take an important part in the portfolio, and we learn deeply into that, and we see that when we serve the woman, it's totally different with the men. And it's interesting that when we look at the data, we see that the loyalty of the woman is much better. And And also, you know that I can see that something like we in the NPL, the non-performing loan, let's help the woman enterprise.
Yeah.
So it means that they care a lot about their business. They manage it very well. And so after this project, you know that we have a lot of product for SME, woman SME, and we also partner with other partners to provide a very, I can share with you later about after the result after this project, what we have been doing until 2017 until now. So we can share it later.
Okay, great. Thanks. One question, I think I'm going to combine these two for you, Ken, is this idea of data analysis like this is expensive. It's, you know, for smaller institutions, it's something that's a harder journey to start on and continue. So is there any, you know, have you seen examples, or do you think there's a possibility of pooling resources or doing it as a collaborative activity, you know, keeping in mind that there's personal data and all of that that you have to deal with?
Well, I mean, first off,
before Ken can have some idea about it. From the perspective of the bank, I can tell with everyone that the cost for this analysis is not a significant one. So that's why
although
I
you're
can
talking
convince
from
my
the perspective of a commercial bank that hires McKinsey as one of their other consultants. So
true. That's true.
We are cheaper than McKinsey, definitely.
So okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Right. So of course, I think the question was more from the perspective not of commercial banks, which have much greater resources, so much as microfinance institutions who have much smaller asset bases and therefore can't spend quite as much. And there actually we do take a somewhat different approach at Andafin, and basically what we do is we provide an analytics subscription service where we don't expect the institution to build those capabilities in-house. We just need to work with their IT department to get that data out of the systems, and so that we can analyze it on an ongoing basis and provide all of that strategic reporting, and then work with the MFI on how to make decisions based on that. So we do take a very different approach depending upon the customer segment.
Okay, great. I have two more questions. I think we should take these and then we can keep moving on, because I think some of this relates to the second part of the session too. So the first question is VPBank using the data they have to run any kind of growth experiments, A/B testing around product features? What is working better? You know, are you doing that kind of real-time analysis, Ms. Phương?
Yeah, yes, we did. Yes.
Okay, great. And on the customer lifetime value, how has VPBank used this data to make different decisions, or are you talking about this later?
That is very critical part that Andafin help us find out.
Okay.
You know that with that CLV, we almost convince our finance team, because you know that every time when we develop a product, the team that we need to convince is the finance. They need a lot of information to prove that it's good for the bank and the bank will get benefit from that. So the CLV actually is a very critical one. Ken can share more about that, how he can find out the CLV and what it is. Yeah, can you do it now, or
we'll get to that just a few slides in. Yeah, like in the next half hour, we're going there.
Okay, all right. I think we should keep moving forward, and we'll take more questions as they come. So thank you everyone for the questions, and let's move on into the dashboard.
So we're going to dig into the actual analysis, looking at the dashboard. but just to provide a brief explanation of what's on the dashboard, we have 6 types of analysis on our dashboard that captures a portion of the analysis that we did in the VPBank credit card project. So first, we're looking at revenue, so segmenting the customer balance, the transaction volume, and then finally the revenue per contract, so the revenue for each company. And that's the interest, the fees, the penalties, and the credit card interchange fees that Ms. Phương talked about. Then we're able to look at the NPL 90 ratio. So non-performing loans that are at least 90 days past due. And we're looking at 90 days rather than a 30 that you would look for on a consumer product or microfinance, simply because we're talking about SMEs that have more irregular cash flows. And so 90 days tends to be more representative of whether there's an actual problem in the business, because cash flows can vary a lot. And actually in this project, we also learned that although the NPLs in some cases went up, the actual write-off rates were fairly low. So these just actually, in some cases, meant the bank ended up collecting even more revenue. Next, we have cohort analysis. So we're taking the customers who joined the bank in each half-year period, and we're looking at how that cohort of customers progressed in their usage of the product in terms of their activity rate, their transaction volume, and revenue. Next, we broke those cohorts down by gender to understand, okay, now within these groups, how do women versus male-owned businesses perform? And then on our last 2 tabs, one, we have a comparison of women versus male-owned businesses. So basically looking at, for a given segment, is there a greater proportion of customers in male-owned or women-owned businesses? And then finally, the one we got the question about just a moment ago, the CLV, we have a complete CLV analysis in the final tab of the dashboard.
All right, so I know Ken went through those slides relatively quickly, but hopefully all of you, or maybe at least half of you, had a chance to look at the dashboard. So let's hear from you, whether you had a chance to look at it or not. We'll use the annotation function. One dashboard that got the first word. Okay, it was sent in an email through Zoom, and we'll share the link. You can look at it even after if you haven't yet. But that was kind of the core of the data that VPBank shared and forms, kind of the insights of this case study that we're going through. So yes, a bit. I don't know who said what, so feel free to, this is anonymous, but it'll give us a good sense of how much time we should spend on going into the details if you haven't looked at it at all. So yes, a bit seems to have gotten the most votes, but I see very few responses. So, I would like to hear from some of the others. And it's okay if you haven't looked at it. We'll just spend a little bit more time on it. Okay, so it looks like we did have some people look at it, which is great. And then I would say we're at about 50-50. And there's a request about walking through the cohort analysis in a little bit more detail. So, okay. And for those who looked at it, I see at least it's like 7, 8 responses. I'd just like to hear if there was anything that jumped out at you, or you just thought cool graphs, or I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Yeah, you can put it in the chat. Let's see. I'm sure somebody had had some sort of insight by looking at those graphs. Okay. Begin to understand how clients use this data effectively. By client, okay.
That's coming
All
up.
right. Yeah. So I guess, you know, I'm going to relate this back to our previous slide where there were people at the crossroads. And so there must have been a lot of questions around it. And we got to what did, ooh, let me see. Now I'm losing the chat. So let me make sure I can follow. I saw that there were NPL spikes for unsecured loans at different moments in time. Thanks, Ravi. Indra had a question about cultural gender-based thinking impacting opportunities for women. We might be able to talk about that a little bit more later. Could not identify the character of various cohorts and then relate them to the 3 data trends. So yes, I think there's a lot of questions about, okay, all of this information, how do you make sense of it? Which was a little bit of my reaction initially when I first looked at it, like, cool ideas, but which one of these is most useful and how do we use this information? So I think it's on to you,
Yeah,
Ken.
I just realized I skipped a slide. Let me go back here before we go to the dashboard.
Okay.
And that's actually related to how to make sense of the information, right?
Yeah.
So we try to think about this in a process of hypothesis testing, right? So you can use the same data set, the same set of analysis to try to understand the customers, the operations at different levels. It really depends upon what you're looking at in the data and whether it's relevant to the question that you're asking right now. Also, you might see other questions, other hypotheses that you can pursue in that data. So the hypothesis that we want to use as we look at the dashboard in this case is that the women's market represents a good opportunity for VPBank SME, specifically that metrics such as profitability and retention of women-owned SMEs are equal to or greater than that of male-owned businesses. So basically, if these businesses are producing metrics that are as good as or better than male-owned businesses, then it would be easy to say we see an opportunity there. So as we go through the data, we might see things that prove our hypothesis, that disprove our hypothesis, or that are entirely irrelevant to our hypothesis. We also might see things that give us ideas about other hypotheses that we could pursue in terms of trying to learn more about the customers or how the bank serves women. So then to go back to the dashboard, let me get that up here. So the dashboard, as Nisha mentioned, you did get a link in your email to andafin.net/workshop. There you can log in with your email address that you registered for the webinar and the password in the email. And so we get the 6 tabs that I mentioned before, one looking at the revenue, then going on to the NPL 90 and the cohorts and so forth. I know we had the question about cohorts, so let's briefly look at that in terms of how that analysis is structured. So each of these graphs is starting at what we say basically is the beginning of that cohort. So for that date 0 on the graph is going to be anywhere from July 1st, 2014 for the second half of 2014 up to, in this case, July 1st, 2016 for the customers who joined in the second half of 2016. And we're seeing on a week-by-week basis, how did the customers in those cohorts perform in their usage of the bank's products. So this first graph, we can see, for example, that the customers who've been with the bank longest, these 2014 cohort customers, at the time of the analysis, about 30% of them were still active on the product. We can also see that some of the newest customers actually are outperforming how previous cohorts did at the same point in time. So for example, this 2016 half year one cohort in blue, we can see that actually they're doing a lot better than previous cohorts in how much, and how active they are on the product, in part due to some new initiatives that the SME business unit had put in place to stimulate greater card usage. So basically what you're doing is you're normalizing different groups of customers, and you're looking at their journeys through using the product, even though those customers joined the bank at different times. How do you look at active? I don't recall the active definition for VPBank on this project, but it typically would be something like the customer has made a transaction in the past set period of time. Maybe it's a month or maybe it's 90 days.
Yeah, it's a month. It's a month. Okay.
It's a month in this case?
The active customer, yeah, have the transaction.
And then we took the same cohorts and broke those down by gender. So here we're looking at one cohort at a time. So this is the earliest cohort of customers on this product from the second half of 2014. And we can see how over the roughly 2.5 years that they've been using the product, how those customers have performed. So basically you have the initial activation of the customers, then usage drops off. Typically the bank does what they call a reactivation campaign after about a year. And that's why you see usage spike up again. The bank is sending different promotions to the customers to try to get them to use, get reactivated and use the product again. And then you see that cycle of, usage falls off and then you have some reactivation continue as well. In this customer cohort, you see that transaction volume increased over time. So the customers who were most faithful and actually stuck around, they actually were the customers who were using the product the most, which makes sense. They had the highest transaction volume. And they were also, the long haul customers were also the ones with the highest average balances. This particular graph, we also see that although women's retention wasn't so good in the first year, women-owned businesses actually stuck around the longest. And actually by the end of the data set, you see that it's about 39 versus 31% retention on women versus male-owned businesses. But that at least in the case of these customers, the women-owned businesses were carrying much lower balances. So anyway, getting back to our hypothesis that women-owned businesses can produce the same or better results than male-owned businesses, we're going to do a little exercise. So this is once again an annotation exercise. So get out your stamp tool. We have 4 choices on the side here. So one, that what I'm pointing out supports the hypothesis. 2, that it disproves the hypothesis. 3, that it's inconclusive, not sure which way it goes. Or 4, finally, that what I'm looking at is actually not relevant to the hypothesis, right? So here we're looking at basically revenue and balance by business owner gender. So we're seeing balances for both business owner genders growing over time, but then female-owned businesses having the highest balances at the end of the period, and average transaction volume being similar, and revenue being similar as well. So what do people think? Supports, disproves, inconclusive, or not relevant?
You need to remind us, people, of the hypothesis.
Right, and the hypothesis again is that profitability and retention of women-owned SMEs are equal to or greater than that of male-owned businesses. And it looks like we have consensus on yes, this supports the hypothesis. Excuse me. And of course, we get into that more deeply in some of our CLB analysis, which we'll get to later. Next, so let me clear the annotation here. Next, we're looking at NPLs by owner gender, right? So here we see some variance. So we see some spikes in NPLs in both customer groups, although actually the customer base was the biggest toward the end of the period. This is a growing product, so we do put a little bit more weight on the right-hand side of these graphs. And we see at the end of the period, men's NPL rate was 4.9% versus 3.2% for women. So where would folks put this result in terms of supporting the hypothesis? Is annotation still working here? There we go. Okay, and yeah, once again, yeah, folks agree it supports the hypothesis. So we started with a couple of easier ones there, right? Next, moving on to, let's see here, which one did I have? Right, okay, so NPLs by industry. Now there's a lot more going on here. And you can actually see when you get into smaller segments, you also have more variation in the results, right? So you have low NPLs from actually a lot of industries. You have a big spike in NPLs from construction, although in an SME portfolio, often that can be because one of your biggest customers, who's proportionally a lot bigger than the other customers, got behind on their payments, because not all these customers are by any means the same size. Also interesting here is that the trading industry has consistently elevated NPLs. There's definitely a consistent issue with the trading industry. So what do folks think about this in terms of the hypothesis? Okay, so we got a lot of mostly inconclusive. And I would generally agree with that. But one thing that's interesting is that we saw that women are disproportionately in trading businesses as compared to men. And so we also know that women overall have lower NPLs, but at the same time, the trading businesses are having NPL issues. So we could form some new hypotheses to look at that in a separate part of our analysis. So one, we could say, okay, one hypothesis is something's misspecified about our product. There's some way we could make our product better to better serve trading businesses and their cash flows. So let's investigate that. Another hypothesis could be that there's something wrong with our credit assessment process for trading businesses. Maybe we're choosing the wrong trading businesses and we need to look at that. So basically, even though this is not directly relevant to our main question, we can get some other ideas about things that we need to explore. So think about kind of like branches of a tree that know which direction do we want to go. We want to basically be aware of those branches that we could explore later in our analysis. Okay, then looking at, let's see, our cohort analysis, which I introduced earlier. So we know, basically how the different customer cohorts are, how much they're using the product, how active they are, their average balance, and that kind of thing. Yes, no, inconclusive, not relevant. Right, not relevant. Basically, the problem is we haven't done any sort of demographic breakdown here. We know it's useful to know these overall trends, but there's not really a lot that we can do with those, right? Next, the cohorts by gender. So here we have the 2014 half year 2 cohort. What does this tell us when we look at men versus women-owned businesses in terms of that cohort and how they've performed over time? Okay, we have a lot of yes supports, right? true. It is some evidence supporting, but it's partial evidence. I would put it more at inconclusive, and we need to investigate further, right? So if we go in here and we actually look at other cohorts, we see that not every cohort is the same, right? So for example, here's a more recent cohort where male-owned companies are actually more active than female-owned companies. If we had looked at this one first, we might have said, oh, no, we've disproved the hypothesis, right? On the other hand, in this particular cohort, the women-owned businesses actually had higher balances. So it goes either way. So actually what we did with this cohort data to combine all of this information in a way that actually is more useful in terms of this hypothesis is the CLV calculation that was asked about before. So what we're doing here is with these green numbers in the first 4 quarters, we are looking at representative customer behavior across all of these cohorts to say, okay, how do these customers use the product in their first year? And we chose 1 year because we had about 2.5 years of data. And by looking at 1 year, that meant that we could look at most of the cohorts and their behavior. We couldn't look at the last cohort because they were too new, but at least we could get enough customer behavior here to understand, okay, how does a customer typically use this product in their first year? And so this is for all customers we're looking at here. We can see their balance, how much revenue they contributed, and then what the cost was for serving those customers. We then multiply that by the customer active rate and a discount rate to produce the net present value of all of that, the cash flows from that customer. We also estimated over the next 4 years how those customers might behave. And these are actually pretty conservative estimates in terms of these totals. We're just adding inflation. And then in terms of the active rate, we're cutting it down on a yearly basis so that actually later years don't have a lot of weight in this model. So we get that net present value of the customer's future cash flows. And then we calculate, we subtract the customer acquisition costs. So the sales incentive, card issuance cost, and customer incentive to arrive at the customer lifetime value. So in this case, for all of the customers on the product, their value in just in terms of using the credit card product and not other products from the bank was 14.7 million Vietnam dong, or about $653. So we could say, okay, that's what it's worth to us to get one of these customers. However, we broke it down several ways. One of them was, of course, by owner gender. We found that, based on the same data collection process and assumptions, the estimated CLV for male owners was just 13.4 million VND, or $596, whereas for female owners, it was 16.8 million, or $747. It was about 25% more for the female-owned businesses. Now that partially was due to greater revenue, and then it was partially due to greater retention. And actually the retention was a big driver there, because it made the value of future years much higher than it was for the men. If these customers are going to stick around and we don't have to go to the cost of acquiring them again, then they're much more valuable to us over time. So that is the quick version of the dashboard. I think that time-wise, we have eaten up quite a bit, so I think we'll move along with the presentation and take the questions at the end. Just a second here. So based on those findings, then we get into presenting the results to senior management, which we're going to go over quickly. So basically, the idea is to highlight key metrics that back up the conclusions, and only to provide the detailed analysis and follow-up to questions for the management and board. So, all of those detailed graphs that I showed you, the CLV model, all that kind of thing, you wouldn't show that to senior management or the board. It's for your understanding of what's going on with this product and how I'm going to back up the decision I'm going to make about what our strategy should be for this product. So an example, taking the analysis from the dashboard, we can say that women-owned SMEs have above average card balances and spend, and that we can see that that trend is intensifying. Their customer retention is higher, and actually overall retention is improving further because of the initiatives of the SME business unit. And due to all of those factors, this customer lifetime value of the women customers is therefore 25% higher than that of the male-owned SMEs. So just boiling it down to the most simple metric of here's why this is a customer base, a customer segment that we should be pursuing. Now, if your management or your board wants to dig into it further, then of course you have some backup information available. So here's an example of a backup slide where you say, okay, board or management, you want to know more about the CLV. Okay, so if we break it down step by step, the women-owned SMEs are producing 23% better revenue, but on the other hand, the collection and write-off costs are only 8% more on a larger balance per customer, right? And so at the end of the day, we end up with a 25% greater CLV. And we are moving a little bit quick, but this, I believe this will all be available to download later on. So based on those findings, Ms. Phương can tell us a little bit about what VPBank did in practice, which I think is exciting to actually be able to have the historical perspective and see how this actually turned out.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. You know that, as Ken mentioned, that 25% higher in the CLV with the woman enterprise compared to the male. So that is the very good number. You know that before this project, we just held the car, the commercial car for the platinum and classic for all kind of on type of customer. So after, based on the output of this project, we decided to build a special, a special product, a special car for women enterprise. That's in the name. You can look at the image here, and of course, together with this project analysis, we also conduct a focus group with our existing customer, our woman, our existing customer. So they share with us some more information. So they would like to have some kind of car that they can keep in their wallet and show with other enterprise that they have a special car for them. So that's why we come up with this car. And that's just the outside, the image outside, but we also build some special feature for this car product. We have 55 days as an interest exemption for women compared to the only 45 days for male. And the interest rate also lower compared to other products. So that's the product we launched in the same year. And after that, we also partnered with the Ignite partnership. We launched some of the special loan, the expansion of non-financial services. So the non-financial services is a very special one that had to diagnostic, just like a diagnostic tool to help the business find out where they are. And with the connection event, we call it matching event. The woman can join us on the event to improve their management, their marketing, on kind of business, and they can share information each other. So, and up to now, we still remain the comprehensive risk solution in just last year, and it's continuing this year. So thanks to the analysis, we have a special product offering for women, and that is I think that the differentiator for VPBank.
Great. Yeah. Now, briefly, moving beyond this into what we can do in data analysis for the product development stage, and the Women Entrepreneur Card is already a great example of that. In terms of data analysis, we can do more detailed segmentation of women customers. So there may be subsegments that the bank is interested in serving. Deep dive on certain sectors, for example, the trading sector. Given the bank's interest in supply chain finance, there's a lot more they might dive into there. Then finally, spend patterns and also customer behavioral clustering using machine learning, where we take customer behaviors and that we actually ask the computer to look for patterns in those customer behaviors where groups of customers are behaving in a certain way. And we can learn from those groups and see what products and services we should be offering those groups. So one quick example from this analysis is spend patterns on the card. So not so relevant to making the case, but very relevant to developing the product. And so here, the graph is showing for the company owner and the primary card holder on the account, are women-owned or male-owned businesses proportionately more likely to be spending in a certain category. So, for example, we see that male-owned businesses are hugely more likely to spend at liquor stores, although it's not what you think. One of the businesses actually wasn't a liquor supply chain, and they were doing a very huge volume on this card, which got us that result. But many of the other results are more indicative of the customer's spend patterns. We, for example, see that women-owned businesses are spending more often on marketing and ads than male-owned businesses. They're also spending more often on hotels and travel, as well as utilities and some others. We looked at both owner gender and primary cardholder gender just in case of problems with the data set. So we think that areas where both graphs go the same way are more consistent. And so in the interest of time, I think I'll skip the exercise, but basically the idea here is to say where should we focus promotions on a card, and where does the bank develop, get revenue, and what's of interest to the customer. And so these are the areas that that the Women Entrepreneur Card had as a focus for their cashback promotion program. Maybe Ms. Phương, you can briefly tell us why that is.
Yeah, actually, because of the high volume spending on this merchant category, and also we get the high interchange from the acquirer. So that's why we offer the cashback special. For example, the Google Ads for Women for WeCard, and that's up to that 0.3% and with no cap. So it means that 0.3% per transaction amount. So after we apply that cashback program, the volume grow a lot. So that's motivate the woman enterprise car holder spend more, and with that we built another kind of cashback program for men. We call this platinum card, just normal platinum card. So that just is some of the example that we use this data to support our cashback and program.
So segmenting the customer value proposition incentives to the different sets of customers and their interests and how they want to grow their businesses. Great. In the presentation, we do have a few sets of tips for financial institutions. However, we are running out of time, so they will be available in the download. But I know we've got some more questions coming in. So Nisha, what are the highlights?
So one question that was, I think I know the answer, but I'll put to you. Did you run into pushback from men for offering better terms for, women on the 55-day as opposed to 45 days and the lower interest rate? And then the other question related to that was, are there any legal issues with, making that very obvious distinction? Ms. Phương, yeah.
No, actually, no. So far from our experience, we get a lot of appreciation from the enterprises, from the customer, and I haven't seen any complaint from male enterprise about this special program for women.
Okay, great. And there was a question earlier, which we did get to, which was, do you have special products designed only for women? So it's more about the terms as opposed to specialized products, right?
Yeah, and because we understand women better, why we also have the deep dive into other subsegments, just like male enterprise. So we offer the cashback based on some of the special category that men usually spend. So that's why we balance the benefit of both subsegments based on the data we have.
Yeah. And then one final question for you. Do you have a specific strategy to target rural women entrepreneurs, or, you know, at the moment it's just mainly, you know, in terms of VPBank's outreach, are you reaching women in rural areas?
We have I think that we have the strategy to serve the woman enterprise.
Okay.
No, yeah, we do have that.
Okay. And Ken, I think I'll bring back a question that came up a little bit earlier, and you touched upon this in the beginning, but it's this idea of, okay, bringing together this kind of analysis with market research, and how does one build on the other? What is the added value? I think there were a couple of questions sprinkled here and there around that. So maybe that we could close on that. And yeah.
Well, I mean, I think you'd be looking for common patterns across those two bodies of research. But actually, the best situation you can have is if that market research also captured your existing customer base in a way where you can key those responses to actual customer accounts and see how customers with different behaviors responded to survey questions. Now, that's not common. Banks don't often have that, but when they do, it's very powerful because you can see both the behavior and the reasons for the customers in different segments, and how they use the product and what they see as a problem or benefit with the product.
Great, thank you. I think we're right at time. So thank you, Ken, and thank you, Ms. Fung, for this very informative webinar. I was fascinated. I think, you know, there's so much existing data that institutions have, and how do you start to use that is something I've heard a lot of times. So hopefully this will be useful. Thank you to everyone who joined us. We will share a recording and the slides. And hopefully, you know, if you have additional questions, you can always email us. All right, with that, we're going to close for today, and thank you for your time, everyone. And please fill out the survey at the end, because we want to know how useful this webinar was for you. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, bye-bye.